What if I told you that one of the most popular medicines in medieval Europe was also the trendiest party drink? Hippocras, or Hippocras if you stick to the French pronunciation, was a spiced and sweetened wine, so prestigious that kings gifted it to each other. It was believed to be so medically effective that doctors prescribed it, and so delicious that everyone wanted more of it. Imagine a world where your doctor hands you a glass of wine, and preferably full, and says with complete authority, "Take 2 of these and call me in the morning." But here's the fascinating part. This wasn't some obscure home treatment or fringe medical practice. For nearly 1,000 years, this sweet, spicy, alcoholic concoction was a staple of Europe's medical arsenal. It was served at royal banquets, prescribed for melancholy, gifted to demonstrate wealth, and no one really questioned whether alcohol was an appropriate medical treatment. So, what magical ingredients made this medieval marvel so special? What can this drink tell us about medicine in the past? And why did doctors eventually stop prescribing wine for everything from digestive troubles to broken hearts? Pour yourself something tasty, medicinal of course, and let's find out. And yes, I will try some of my Hippocras here and let you know my thoughts. Hello, lovely history fans. I'm Dr. Julia Martins, a historian with a particular fascination for how food and drink shaped societies throughout history, and especially the overlap between food and medicine. If you're new here, welcome to my channel. Make sure to give this video a thumbs up if you enjoy it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, and please consider becoming a patron on Patreon and help me keep on making history videos. Now, I'll admit it, I have a bit of an obsession with Hippocras. I first came across this drink when I was reading the Accursed King series by Maurice Druon as a teenager. And by the way, I highly recommend checking out this series. If you're a fan of Game of Thrones, you'll love it. But anyway, in the books, there's a scene in which the women are discussing how to get the king's brother, Philippe de Poitiers, to fall in love with his wife once again after many court intrigues. They decide to give him a love philter, or a love potion, mixed in his Hippocras, which was itself considered to be an aphrodisiac. The spices in the wine would cover up any traces of their concoction, they thought. So Philippe drinks the Hippocras, compliments it, and not much later his wife, Jeanne, is pregnant. The love potion apparently worked. Of course, this is a historical novel, there's a lot of fantasy in it, but it gives us an idea of the role Hippocras played in the medieval period. I'm interested in it not just because it's a delicious medieval drink, though it certainly is that, but because it sits at this fascinating crossroads of medicine, luxury, and everyday life. It's one of those historical curiosities that reveals so much more about a society than you might initially think. And Hippocras isn't just a thing of the past. I mean, this bottle here, I picked it up during a recent trip to a medieval French town, Pérouge. It's a modern recreation of this ancient beverage. What secrets might this mysterious bottle hold? I'll be tasting it later to see if it lives up to its prestigious reputation. But first, let's explore how a spiced wine became both a medical necessity and the party drink of choice for medieval nobility. Both the pronunciation and spelling of Hippocras varied widely across time and space, with variations such as Hippocras, Hippocras, Hippocrates, and many more. Now, Hippocras may sound like something out of a fantasy novel, but its name has surprisingly scholarly origins. The term derives from Hippocrates, the famous Greek physician born around 460 BCE. Yes, the same Hippocrates of the Hippocratic Oath that doctors still reference today. But Hippocrates didn't actually invent the drink that bears his name. Rather, medieval Europeans named it after the Hippocratic sleeve, or manicum Hippocraticum in Latin, a conical cloth filter supposedly invented by Hippocrates to purify liquids. In the Hippocratic tradition, wine could be used in lots of ways, including to nurse convalescents back to health. Medieval illustrations show apothecaries using these cloth filters to strain the spice-infused wine until it was clear, giving the drink both its name and its association with medical authority. According to the famous regimen Sanitatis Salernitanum, a medieval medical poem from the school of Salerno, sound wine revives in age the heart of youth, while poor wine acts the other way, forsooth. This medieval health manual essentially gave Europeans permission to drink their medicine, a prescription I'm sure was enthusiastically followed. This was essentially the medieval equivalent of an apple a day keeps the doctor away, except their advice was more along the lines of a cup of spiced wine makes everything fine. The concept of medicinal wine itself stretches back even further. The Abbas Papyrus from ancient Egypt contains numerous wine-based recipes. The Romans enjoyed conditum paradoxum, or marvelous spiced wine, made with honey, pepper, mastic, bay leaves, saffron, and dates. If you're thinking this sounds suspiciously like a cocktail recipe rather than medicine, you're catching on to the delightful ambiguity that surrounded Hippocras throughout its history. To understand why medieval Europeans were so keen on medicinal wine, we need to dive into the fascinating world of medieval medicine and the theory of the four humours, which I have mentioned several times on this channel, but bear with me, I'll be quick. According to this theory, which dominated Western medicine for over 1,500 years, the human body contained four essential fluids or humours: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Health was maintained by keeping these humours in balance, and illness occurred when this balance was disrupted. Each humour had specific qualities: hot or cold, wet or dry. Blood was hot and wet, phlegm was cold and wet. Yellow bile was hot and dry, black bile was cold and dry. Foods and medicines were similarly classified based on these qualities. Wine itself was considered hot and dry in nature. Wine was also the drink believed to be closest to human blood, which explains why physicians considered it useful to medicine and to make patients stronger. By adding warming spices like cinnamon, ginger, and cloves, all classified as hot, physicians created a potent remedy for conditions caused by excess cold or moisture in the body. According to the great 13th century scholar Albertus Magnus, Hippocras had warming properties that made it beneficial for the stomach and digestion. What's interesting is how medieval doctors created elaborate justifications for what was essentially a delicious treat. Even the famous physician Arnaldus de Villanova, in his treatise Liber de Vinis, so Book on Wines, included spiced wine among his cordial remedies. He even reportedly prepared a spiced wine formula for Pope Clement V as a longevity potion. It seems even the highest levels of medieval society were convinced of Hippocras' medicinal powers. And this lasted way beyond the medieval period. Andrés Laguna, the distinguished 16th century Spanish physician and botanist, praised Hippocras in his commentary on Dioscorides de Materia Medica. He noted that the spiced wine wonderfully aids digestion and comforts the vital spirits, especially in winter. Recipes for Hippocras varied across time and depended on regional availability of ingredients, and as always, your budget. But a typical recipe for Hippocras could include cinnamon, ginger, cloves, and grains of paradise, which is a peppery West African spice, sometimes with galangal, long pepper, nutmeg, and mace. These were ground to a powder, mixed with wine and a sweetener, sugar or honey, and then carefully strained through cloth until clear. The color of the final product could vary depending on whether you were using red or white wine, of course. Still, the result was essentially a spicy, sweet, port-like wine that physicians prescribed to their patients and that the aristocracy enjoyed at feasts. You could drink it after fasting, at the start of the meal, or at feasts alongside sweets. Quite convenient that this medical necessity also happened to be absolutely delicious and made cold winter evenings much more bearable. It's rather like claiming chocolate is essential for emotional balance. Technically defensible, delightfully convenient. Interestingly, the choice of sweetener carried its own medical and social significance. Sugar was quite costly until the expansion of colonial sugar plantations in the 16th century, and so a 14th century English source noted that sugar was reserved for lords making Hippocras, while regular people used honey in their spiced wine. By the 14th century, Hippocras had transformed from purely medicinal to fabulously fashionable. It became the essential finale to any respectable feast among European nobility. In fact, the modern term banquet comes from the Italian banchetto or bench, and originally referred specifically to that final course with Hippocras and sweetmeats served in a separate room or outdoors on a bench or a long table. After a long feast, and medieval feasts could last many hours with dozens of dishes, hosts would clear the dining hall and offer Hippocras with confections, candied fruits, nuts, and wafers. Court records from across Europe attest to the extravagant consumption of Hippocras at royal events. In 1472, when the Burgundian lord Louis de Grutuse visited the English court, he was treated to green ginger, diverse syrups, comfits, and Hippocras before bed. The medieval equivalent of turn-down service with premium minibar access, I guess. Charles V of France and the Burgundian dukes were particularly fond of it. The drink even enters medieval law in darker ways. The notorious 15th century Baron Gilles de Rais, sometimes known as the first serial killer in recorded history, was said to give his victims copious Hippocras before killing them, highlighting its use as both a luxury item and an intoxicant. And since we're talking of violence, let me quickly go back to Game of Thrones, which was very much inspired by the medieval period. I came across a quote by Cersei Lannister, the evil queen who spent several seasons on her balcony drinking what could presumably be Hippocras. She thinks to herself, "A man may prefer the taste of Hippocras, yet if you set a tankard of ale before him, he will quaff it quickly enough." Deliciously cynical, isn't it? Anyway, let's go back to history. Hippocras became so synonymous with sophistication that it was commonly presented as a prestigious gift. Royal accounts from the 1500s record significant expenditures on spices and sugar to make Hippocras for celebrations and diplomatic exchanges in lots of different courts. Even Queen Elizabeth I, she was a Hippocras enthusiast apparently. It was the medieval equivalent of bringing an expensive bottle of wine to your boss's dinner party, except this wine was also supposedly, good for their liver. Imagine attending a royal banquet in 15th century Europe where servants appear with beautiful glass decanters of ruby red Hippocras. The spiced aroma fills the room as they pour it into your goblet. You're simultaneously indulging in the luxury, partaking in a social ritual, and technically taking preventative medicine. Sounds lovely, doesn't it? Let's talk recipes. Medieval Hippocras was not a standardized product. It varied by region, wealth, and intended use. However, most recipes followed a similar pattern, and if you're interested in making your own, make sure to check out the video description below for suggestions on how to do that. A typical French formula from the late 14th century, found in Le Ménager de Paris, called for a mixture of 5 parts cinnamon, 2.5 parts cassia buds, 1.5 parts Mecca ginger, a particularly potent dark ginger, 1.5 parts grains of paradise, and 2 parts combined nutmeg and galangal. This would be ground to a powder and infused in wine with approximately 250 grams of sugar per 2 liters of wine. The choice of base wine was flexible. Both red and white wines were used, though red seems to have been more common. In France, Greek wine, imported strong wine from the Mediterranean, was sometimes favored, likely due to prestige and, I imagine, to the connection to the Greek physician Hippocrates. Just for a comparison, here are 2 17th century versions of Hippocras from Robert May's 1660 book, The Accomplished Cook. To make Hippocras, take to a gallon of wine 3 ounces of cinnamon, 2 ounces of sliced ginger, a quarter of an ounce of cloves, an ounce of mace, 20 corns of pepper, an ounce of nutmegs, 3 pounds of sugar, and 2 quarts of cream. Cream! Yes, this is a rather creative recipe, but yes, cream, apparently. Other ways. Take to a pottle of wine an ounce of cinnamon, an ounce of ginger, an ounce of nutmegs, a quarter of an ounce of cloves, 7 corns of pepper, a handful of rosemary flowers, and 2 pounds of sugar. No cream here, which I think is probably a good choice. Recipe books often offered readers more than one way of doing something, depending on their budget, their skill level, and what ingredients were available to them. As I mentioned, the sweetener was a key social status marker. Early medieval recipes tended to use honey, creating a drink called claret or clary, from Latin claratum vinum, clarified wine. As cane sugar became more easily available in Europe, first as an expensive spice, later more commonly by the 15th and 16th centuries, it began replacing honey in luxury recipes. Spice merchants even sold ready-made Hippocras spice packets, so the medieval equivalent of those pre-mixed mulling spices that we see at Christmas markets today. This shows how popular the drink had become. What's particularly amusing about medieval Hippocras production is how seriously they took the filtering process. One recipe recommends filtering the mixture 7 times through a cloth bag until perfectly clear. I can just imagine a medieval servant sighing as they're told to strain the Lord's Hippocras for the 5th time. Is 4 times not enough, my lord? No, Jacques. The physician specifically said 7 times ensures optimal humoral balance. Now get back to straining. All that effort for what was essentially a spiced wine cocktail. And I apologize for the medieval recreation. I swear I haven't even had any Hippocras yet. By the late 17th century, Hippocras began its slow decline. Several factors contributed to its fall from favor. First, drinking fashions changed dramatically with the introduction of new beverages. Coffee, tea, and chocolate arrived in Europe, offering alternative stimulants and digestives that were increasingly fashionable. These newcomers had the advantage of novelty and exoticism, qualities that Hippocras, after centuries of popularity, could no longer claim. Second, improvements in winemaking reduced the need for spiced wines. Better techniques for wine preservation and the growing popularity of fortified wines, like port and sherry, meant that adding spices was no longer necessary to potentially mask the taste of less than perfect wine, a practical function that Hippocras had sometimes served as well. Further evidence of Hippocras' medical standing comes from Nicolas Lemery, the French chemist who, even as late as 1700, still listed vin hippocraticum under cordial waters. This shows that even as empirical science was emerging, the tradition of Hippocras as a health-giving beverage persisted well into the early modern period. But by the mid-18th century, Hippocras was viewed as rather old-fashioned. It did persist in certain regions and for special occasions. English recipe books from the 1720s, even 30s, still included Hippocras recipes, but overall consumption dwindled dramatically. What's rather ironic is that just as Hippocras was falling out of medical favor, it was becoming easier to make, thanks to cheaper sugar and more available spices. It's like finally being able to afford that expensive, trendy supplement just as scientists announce it, that it doesn't actually do anything. So by the time of the French Revolution, Hippocras was rarely seen even in France, eventually being relegated to the status of historical curiosity. The once universal nectar of medieval feasts had been demoted from miracle medicine to outdated indulgence. The magic potion of medieval Europe had become just another quaint historical footnote. Or had it? Okay, we got to the fun bit, at least for me, as I get to actually taste this. So, although Hippocras has nearly vanished, it has also had several revivals in modern times. In a few regions of France, small producers have kept the tradition alive, like the lovely people who made this bottle here, the Hostellerie du Vieux Pérouge. But they're not the only ones. In the Ariège region of the Pyrenees, the Séguéla family has been producing Hippocras since 1870, using what they claim is an original recipe, with wine, honey, and spices passed down through generations. Similar artisanal producers can be found in the Haute-Loire region, around Le Puy, where they sometimes mark a traditional Hippocras as a filtre d'amour, so a love potion, playing up the old beliefs in its aphrodisiac properties. See how we go back to the story told by Maurice Truand of the love philtre who made Prince Philippe fall back in love with his wife? So the marketing may have changed, but the essential appeal remains the same. It's delicious, it's historical, and who knows, it might just be good for you. Hippocras has also found a place in historical reenactments, medieval-themed banquets, and Christmas markets. In some Swiss and French Christmas markets, vendors sell pre-made, pre-mixed Hippocras spices or bottled Hippocras, making this medieval treat accessible to modern consumers. A particularly delightful modern tradition occurs in Basel, Switzerland, where since 1996 the city has celebrated New Year's Day with the Nejors Adringede. Please excuse my pronunciation. So the historic Dreizack fountain in central Basel flows with Hippocras instead of water, and citizens gather at 11 a.m. to fill their glasses and toast the new year. I can only imagine medieval physicians nodding approvingly at this public health initiative. And now I think it's time to taste this modern recreation that I brought back from France, made by the Hostellerie du Vieux Pérouge, and described as a stimulant and digestive wine-based medieval beverage of the first order, prepared following the recipe of Guillaume Tirel Taillevent, King Charles VII's famous chef. Okay, here we go. Smells nice. Okay. Tastes nice too. What strikes me immediately, it's like the deep, rich aroma. Cinnamon and cloves dominate with that distinctive sweetness underneath. The taste is like a port wine, or rather like Madeira, that's been infused with Christmas spices. It's warming and complex and definitely pleasant. I can certainly see why medieval nobles consider this a treat worth serving at their banquets. It's really nice. Is it medicine? Well, not really, though the warming spices do seem to create a pleasant sensation in the body, and there's something undeniably cheerful about a beverage that combines the pleasure of wine with the comfort of spices. If you add the historical element to it, it's pretty hard to resist. What I love about historical food and drink is how it connects us to the past. We might not wear medieval clothing or live in castles, but we can taste what our ancestors tasted, perhaps the most immediate way to understand their world. What I find most compelling about Hippocras in particular is how it challenges our modern compartmentalization of food and medicine. Today, it seems that we're constantly forced to choose between what's good for us and what we enjoy, between kale and donuts. We separate healthy salads from indulgent desserts, bitter medicines from pleasant treats, and necessary purchases from luxury splurges. Just imagine if your doctor prescribed chocolate cake as a legitimate treatment. We would all be booking appointments. Well, Hippocras blurred all of these boundaries. It was simultaneously a medical prescription, a status symbol, and a gastronomic pleasure. It reminds us that throughout most of human history, the lines between these categories were much more fluid than we now assume them to be. This medieval spiced wine also demonstrates how medical theories reflect cultural values. The humoral system that justified Hippocras wasn't merely a set of medical beliefs, it was a comprehensive worldview that connected the human body to the broader universe. Just as Hippocras balanced hot and cold, wet and dry qualities to restore health, medieval people sought balance in all aspects of their lives. As we raise our own glasses today, whether filled with wine, tea, water, or indeed Hippocras, perhaps we might reconsider our own compartmentalized view of pleasure and health. Must medicine always be separate from pleasure? Must luxury always be distinct from necessity? I'll leave you with that thought and with a toast in the style of a medieval physician. May your humours be balanced, your spirits be lifted, and your cup, whatever it contains, be full and bring both health and happiness. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and who knows, maybe become a patron on Patreon. I promise that if I buy more wine, it will be strictly for research purposes. Or maybe not. Anyway, thank you, see you next time, and cheers!